Good morning, Salon B here, and I'm going to talk about the psychology of Charlemagne the God. I gotta bring it to the head. I gotta bring it to the door for y'all. Okay, now we did. Everybody know that they saw the interview with Charlemagne and Monique, and Charlemagne basically named his name after this guy on the left who was Charlemagne of Charles the Great. He was a king of the Franks of the Holy Roman Empire. He was a ruler of the Frankish kingdom. He led an excursion into Muslim Spain, and Muslim Spain was ran by African Muslims, okay, who were calling themselves Moors. He led an excursion into Muslim Spain. He was there to campaign for Christianity. So he was there to get converts for Christianity. And if you don't know anything about the war between the Muslims and the Christians, it's been a billion-year old ancient history that Muslims and Christians had a war. Okay? And back in the day, Christians were white people and black people were Muslims. Because in ancient Egypt, not the day today, the modern Islam that y'all see today, the Muslims that took down 9/11, so-called allegedly 9/11, those are modern Muslims. If you go back to ancient Egypt, there's an ancient Islam they practiced, and that was the science of the stars, astronomy, and all of that. Okay? So Charlemagne the God went into Europe. I mean, not the God, Charlemagne of Charles the Great. He went into Spain to campaign for Christianity because that's when the Catholic Church emerged. And he killed a bunch of African Muslims. And that's how they got rulership of Rome. Okay? Now, this is who Charlemagne named himself after, which his real name is Leonard or Leonard. Okay? Now, when Monique started calling him Leonard, she knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that this man is suffering from an identity crisis. Instead of calling himself by his government name, which is what his mother gave him, he rather call himself a white Roman emperor. And brothers are getting mad because of the way she addressed him. He's naming himself after a white Roman emperor. If this is not identity crisis, I don't know what is. Charlemagne the God is suffering from an identity crisis. Let's get into it. So, when Monique started calling Charlemagne Leonard, she took his character, his idol worshiping mentality away and called him by his government name he was acting, which is a form of our identity crisis. Charlemagne the God is an actor. This man doesn't even know who he is. He won't even use his birth name that his mother and his grandmother gave him. Okay? But everybody's in the uproar saying that she disrespected him by calling him his government name. Why you can't have your government name? Didn't your mother give it to you? Didn't your father give it to you? What is the problem? Anyway, let's read what an identity crisis is according to psychology, because now we're getting into the psychology of this black man who is calling himself a white Roman emperor who killed billions and millions of black Muslims. Identity crisis is a period of uncertainty and confusion in which a person's sense of identity becomes insecure. Now, a strong identity emerges not only from the conscious contemplation of your life's purpose, and there's 4 identity statuses. They are built from high and low positions on two identity dimensions. Okay, people of high on commitment identity have a firm sense of who they are and feel strongly about choices that they have made. And this is Monique. Okay, Monique comes from a strong identity commitment, high, knowing who she is, knowing what her purpose is. She was on her purpose on the Breakfast Club. She met someone on the low identity dimension, which is Charlamagne the God. People with low identity commitment have an uncertain sense of self, which is what Charlamagne the God is. He is a person of low identity commitment, which means he has low self-esteem and he has no identity. He is copying off of some white emperor who killed lots of African Muslims, and he's calling himself Charlamagne the God. Instead of calling himself his birth name for what his grandmother gave him or his mother gave him, he would rather be a white emperor sitting on a white-owned breakfast club who basically plays a lot of anti-African music. And every time somebody from the Caribbean or Africa come on there, he got something nasty to say about them, or he denies them the right to talk about colorism. Okay? This is what identity crisis look like, okay? Because this brother is suffering from it. And another part of identity status is exploration. Exploration is when a person is always looking and searching for themselves. That's a part of identity. You should always be searching for who you are through life, which is self-reflection. But to have a low identity commitment, that is low self-esteem, and that's insecurity, and that's an identity crisis. And when Monique, who has a strong identity commitment, she knows who she is, she knows what her purpose is, because she has a resume in Hollywood. The woman has worked. Okay, she had a show yesterday. I was looking at the Parkers. That the Parkers was on for a long time. Okay, Monique lost her status also when Bob sold BET. When he sold BET, that's why her show and everything collapsed. The Parkers, everything. BET has went down the drain. We don't even know what BET is anymore. They call it Black Entertainment, but it's not Black Entertainment because Viacom owns it now, who is owned by a white guy. Okay? So it's not going to be Black Entertainment because blacks do not have an interest in it. Okay? The only interest they have is behind that TV when they flicking the BET and looking at anything on there. Other than that, you don't have an interest. You don't have an invested interest in your economic funding, and financial rewards do not go to BET. Okay? So let's be clear on that. So Charlamagne is a person that's suffering from identity crisis. So again, this is why I said you cannot talk to somebody like this. And when you come to the South, that's the example of men that you're going to deal with. Some of these men have identity crisis because they have actually accepted Christianity to some degree. And Christianity is basically, what I was taught, is something that white people, that's their religion. That's a white person's religion. So this person is up here trying to fight for some type of black power, but he has a white man's mentality, which is what Marcus Garvey and every other black freedom fighter said, that this is what we got to watch out for, because they are not black, even though their skin looks to be of an African person. Their mind is not of an African person. Charlamagne the God mind is not of an African person. It is of a Roman emperor, okay? And he is there to make sure that any person that has a strong identity of knowing who they are, which is what black power and black history and African history teaches you of having a strong identity. So you won't have an identity crisis and you won't be looking for or acting as if you are some person that you're not. Okay, instead of calling himself Leonard, he calls himself Charlemagne, which is a Christian emperor who killed African Muslims. This is why she said, why would somebody from South Carolina call themselves Charlemagne? Are you serious? You're a damn joke. And then she started to call him the house nigga, because that's what a house nigga is. He is someone who wants to be somebody he's not. He has an identity crisis. He's trying to be an overseer. He's trying to be like his mentor. So then he writes a book. And I need y'all to go to Lamage YouTube channel. He did a review of Charlamagne's book, and Charlamagne's book is garbage. He went through all of the stuff that Charlamagne was talking about in that book, and it's garbage. It's garbage when it comes from a person who has an identity crisis, because a person with an identity crisis, more than likely, if you do statistics, anybody with an identity crisis has a mental illness, and they always end up with a mental illness because they don't know who they are. This dude is going to probably end up being on some psych medicines, or he was a drug addict at one time before he even became famous. He was selling drugs. And this is why I said in my video, the death and the destruction of Black power and hip hop. This is the main issue we have in our community. We have Negroes like this who come from this type of background, and they will not give a damn about selling out their own people or selling crack to a pregnant lady. Okay, they don't care. They will sell you out. These are the overseers that Marcus Garvey and everybody else, and like Monique said when that camera went off, you are the house nigga. The house nigga is the one that keeps the field niggas from running away and keeps the field niggas on the Democratic plantation. This is the psychology of Charlamagne the God. Okay, so now, when we look at mental illness is basically this: not knowing who you are. A lot of people keep saying, oh, well, there's no such thing as mental illness. Or with this Florida shooting, they said there's no such thing as mental illness. There is a such thing as mental illness when you don't know who the hell you are. When you don't know who you are, you tend to do what the savage does or the animal does. If you have a dog or a cat needs a guide if it's going to live in a house or live amongst people or whatever. They need a guide, okay? They need someone to put them under some type of rulage or tutelage. And at that point, they need that human guide to make sure that they are on good behavior or whatever. Okay? And when you come into society is just being civilized, being able to compromise, being able to get yourself in order. This is also left and right brain issues. Left brain dealing with order, right brain dealing with being out of order, being rebellious, being whatever. Okay, so Charlamagne has assimilated so damn much that he's done picked up someone else's culture, which is our problem today. We picked up a lot of the Europeans' culture and we don't know our own culture, which causes us to become mentally unstable, mentally ill, have identity crisis. We got so much of the Europeans' savagery or whatever their culture that we don't know ourselves. And then when we go into white history, we understand that they don't even know themselves. They don't even know where they come from. They have always searched into the tombs of Egypt looking for their ancestors, looking for their existence on this earth. The European is only 6,000 years old, so they are still searching for themselves, which is the reason why they have identity crisis. This is why this young man, this is why they go into the schools and shoot up the schools. Because what I learned when I was coming up from my black uncles, that these people have identity crisis. They don't know who they are. Francis Welsing said it. This is why they suffer from narcissism, because they don't know who they are. They search by getting all these name brands, all this technology, just to have some sense of self, okay, some sense of identity. So for us to look up to somebody like Charlamagne and say, hey, he made it. Where did he make it to? He made it to the front of the plantation, because that's the only place he's going, is in the front of the plantation, to keep everybody from going out of the door and running away and getting off the Democratic plantation. That's about it. He won't be doing anything else, because they're not going to put him in no leadership, because he's too damn stupid. He's a fool, he's an actor, he's a character, and he has no identity. And he is actually worshiping the white Roman Charlemagne. And until he gets rid of that name, that is who he is. He is not Leonard. He is a white emperor, or acting as one, because an emperor is someone who is a ruler, right? He acts like he's in charge of all this black history. He acts like he knows it all, and he's nothing but a fucking narcissist. A narcissist is someone who goes around stealing people's identity because they don't know who the fuck they are. And it just is. Y'all can call it what y'all want. You can say what you want, but I know what it is, because I study psychology enough to know. In business, this is why black people, we don't have an economy, because you are too busy trying to assimilate using someone else's religion and using somebody else's identity, and then you're trying to be somebody, and then you can't connect to African history because you got someone else's ideology. This is why when an African person or a person with a strong identity like Monique come in his presence, he starts to push back to that, because that's what mental illness is going to do. If you ever work with anybody in some type of psych ward or anything like that, when you try to engage them with the truth, they're going to shut down. They're going to do all kinds of tactics to keep you from educating them, and they feel like they got to protect themselves. So then they start coming at you from all kinds of savage ways, and it makes no sense. And you're looking at them like, what is wrong with this person? They are crazy. That's what's wrong with them. They have no identity, and they're still in an animalistic state, because when you are in an animalistic state, you have no identity. You are back in the jungle. You're back doing what animals do, which is kill. You're back on the food chain, So that's what I have for this Charlamagne the God. This is the psychology of him. And this is what I know to be true working with people who have mental illnesses. I've seen it all. I've seen it. I've worked with my mother for years and wondered what was wrong with her. And I understand what it was. My mother does not know how to read. And in the United States government, you had to know how to read. If you don't know how to read, number one, that's a disability. Okay, and a disability still leads back to some type of mental or physical handicap. Okay, every time that I spoke the truth to my mother, she would run away or go in her room, close her door. She didn't want to hear it. When you speak the truth, a person is going to run away, or they're going to use type of tactics to shut it down because they don't want to hear it. Okay? Charlamagne the God had to get quiet, and he had to, and I'm glad that he had to sit on that panel and be quiet and listen, because he needed that. This brother needs to wake up, and he needs to go and find out who the hell he is. If he needs to go to some type of African or go around the conscious people, please do that and learn African history. Learn it for what it is. Get it in your spirit, get it in your mind. Because you have inhaled too much of the Europeans' culture. Did y'all notice when Dame Dash came on The Breakfast Club and Charlamagne, DJ Envy were not in understanding what entrepreneurship was? They were actually pushing back because they work. They are slaves. They work on a job. Okay? And when I say slave, I'm talking about before the terms employer and employee came on the scene. The terms were master and slave. These are business terms. Master and slave. A master is an entrepreneur. A slave is a employee. Okay? This is all United States history. When you study business, you do nothing but learn the economic structure of the United States system and how to run a business and how to be an entrepreneur and how to deal with wages and the IRS and the feds and all of that. The FDR, the IRS, the Federal Reserve. This is all United States history, okay? So the terms, the business terms, the law terms, all included in this presentation, okay? Master is an entrepreneur. Slave is an employee, okay? They don't use those terms anymore because they were very harsh terms. So they use more softer terms, which is employer, employee, okay? So when Dame Dash came on the show, the employees of the Breakfast Club was jumping on his ass because they did not understand not getting paid from an employer and going off on their own as an entrepreneur. Okay, they did not understand it. So Dame Dash was getting heated with Charlamagne. If you go back and look at that interview, Dame Dash was like, you can't understand it because you working for somebody. You don't own your own da-da-da-da-da. And Charlamagne could not understand it. This is why I say this brother has an identity crisis, because he can't understand being on his own. He can't understand not having an employer feed his family. He cannot understand being the man of your household and building your own community. He can't understand that. Slaves cannot understand this. This is why when the United States came into existence, this is why a lot of people got killed, because they was like, I am not giving up my entrepreneurship to go under this bullshit. Okay? So this is why Charlamagne pushes back on entrepreneurs, like Damon Dash. He pushes back on Amara La Negra, on colorism, because when he's from the South Carolina. I lived in the South all my life. Tell me why a lot of people who are light of hue that I have actually came across while I was dating said that they have never dated a dark-skinned person. This is some crazy ass shit. And colorism is an invention of Virginia. I keep telling y'all, the Racial Integrity Act required that the United States break all of the races into two races, whites and coloreds. Okay? The whites could do everything. The coloreds could do nothing. The ones that could pass for white use colorism to keep dark-skinned people out. Okay, so now that we know that, this is still ingrained in the psychology of a person that comes from the deep South. They cannot understand And if they're dark skinned, they are the worst when it comes to colorism because they practice it themselves. So when Amara Negra comes to Charlamagne and says, look, I am suffering from colorism, he asks her, is it all in her mind? And this motherfucker coming straight from the deep south because this is what is practiced in the south. Color